Alrighty, well, hello everybody. My name is Bill Henrichs, and I am on staff with Crew, formerly known as Campus Crusade for Christ. I don't know where we are in that transition, but somewhere along the way. Tonight we're going to talk about some distortions of truth, actually. And I'm excited about what we're going to talk about tonight. First, I will, since I'm up here, I feel like this is slightly obligatory, but also like I really want to do this. I want to show some pictures of my wife and kids. So there's my beautiful wife, April, and my two boys. William is 4 on the right, over here, and then Sam is he'll be 3. I was going to share some funny quotes from them, but I got vetoed, so they were inappropriate. There's a lot of things to fidget with up here. It's bad news. Okay, well, let me ask you guys something. Have you ever lost $35,000? No. I'm guessing that no one in here has done that except me. So I'm gonna expound on that story a little bit later. But tonight we're going to look at a passage in the Gospel of Matthew, 14, verses 22 to 23. And this is a passage where Peter, who's a disciple of Jesus, walks on water. So for some of you in here, maybe you're thinking, I've heard this thing a million times. And then maybe there are others in here that for you, there's really not a lot that's familiar with the Bible. And so I want to just say, again, what Will is communicating, this is a place for both of you and everyone in between. So it's totally great wherever you are. We want to come alongside you in that and help you grow towards Jesus. But through unpacking this story and sharing with you a piece of my story, we're going to address a distortion about faith and this false idea that our faith is guided by and directed by our feelings about our circumstances, our feelings about the Word of God, and even our feelings, our feelings about ourselves. But the reality is our faith needs to be directed by God, His character, and His Word, or even ultimately what God says about our circumstances, what God says about His Word, and what God says about ourselves. So tonight, let's go to our passage. A little bit of context here. Right before this story of Peter and Jesus walking on water. This is really annoying me. Right before that happens is another famous story, and that's where Jesus feeds 5,000. And what was going on there is actually Jesus had actually drawn away because he had just found out that his best friend, John the Baptist, had been beheaded. And so Jesus was in a lot of pain and mourning his friend John. But people began to see Jesus, and they had heard stories about this Jesus character and all his miracles and things that he was doing. And so they began to surround him. Very quickly, there's a large crowd around him. And the passage says that Jesus was moved with compassion, which is very typical of Jesus. And he began to heal their sick. And he did this for quite a while, and then the disciples, in very much a disciple fashion, they got really, really tired, a little annoyed, and so they walk up to Jesus. They're like, "Yo, Jesus, can you make these people, I don't know, tell them to go eat or something. Get them away, I'm tired." And Jesus' response says, "Why don't you guys feed them?" And the disciples are like, well, we've got this problem, so we've only got 5 loaves and 2 fish, so you said there's 5,000 people here. What are we supposed to do about that? And actually, the text is 5,000 men. And when this was written, usually when a large count was done of people, it was just done of men. So if you include women and children, this is probably more around 15 to 20,000 people. So Jesus says, "It's all right. Bring your 5 loaves and 2 fishes to me." Well, fish to me. We'll make that work. And so he blesses it and he begins to distribute it. And most of you guys know the story. He ends up feeding everyone until they're stuck, and they gather all the leftovers, and there's 12 baskets left. And so that's directly before it happens, and then we'll pick up the passage from there. So let me do this. Let me pray, and then we'll read the passage. Jesus, I thank you so much for the way that you pursue us, that you love us. Thank you for dying on the cross for us, Lord. Thank you for your word that guides us in truth. Thank you that you are the object of our faith and that you are steadfast and true and you will never change. God, I pray that tonight as we unpack your word, that you would speak to our hearts and change us because it comes from your word. So I pray this in your name. Amen. All right. Next slide. There we go. Okay, so immediately, this passage immediately is in here a lot, so it's kind of a key word. So immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on a mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land. I can read, really. Beaten from the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. Of course, why wouldn't he? But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." The next slide. And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." Okay. I like to throw paper, like David Letterman. So let's unpack this. So we're going to walk kind of through this verse by verse and see really what's kind of going on here. So it says, immediately after the miracle, Jesus sends the disciples away to cross over the Sea of Galilee to the town of Gennesaret, something like that. But 2 weeks ago, if you remember, Christian talked a little bit about the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee was susceptible to storms suddenly. It was below sea level, but also the disciples were pretty familiar with it. So there's a lot of stories in Scripture about the Sea of Galilee. But Jesus sends the disciples away, and commentators agree that they didn't want to go. They weren't exactly excited. Like I said earlier, they were already exhausted. So the last thing they wanted to do was get in a boat and sail and row a boat across a large sea. But they did it. So they think they're somewhere on the east side, and they're going over that Gennesaret. I don't know how you say it. Somewhere over in that direction. So they go, though. They listen to Jesus. They trust him, so they go. Then the next thing Jesus does, he sends the crowd away. And after he sends the crowd away, he draws into solitude because he wants to go and be with his Father, God the Father, and he wants to pray. So the pastor says he did, by the time everyone was gone, had drawn off by himself. It was sometime in the evening, so conservatively, let's say it's like 7 p.m. So by 7 p.m., Jesus was by himself. So the story picks up with the disciples being about 3 to 3.5 miles away from their starting location. So maybe you're thinking like, oh, they're making pretty good time. Well, actually, that's not really what happened, because after that, we find out that when they were 3 to 3.5 miles away, it was the fourth watch. Well, the fourth watch was somewhere between 3 and 6 a.m. So do some math there. That means that they had been on a boat for 8 to 11 hours trying to get across the sea. So they, like I said, they were already exhausted. So at this point, they're physically, emotionally, and spiritually, they're just done. And I'm guessing at this point, too, that they're probably a little ticked off. Like maybe they're thinking, why would he lead us here? Like, where is he? Like, I thought he was going to come with us. Like, what's happening right now? So they're really confused. But I did a little math just to kind of figure, well, how fast are they going here? So if you take 3.5 miles divided by 11 hours, or whatever I did, it's roughly 0.3 miles an hour. So I'm pretty sure I could probably run around the sea a little faster than they were actually going. But it said, part of the problem was that it says the wind is contrary to them. So that means the wind is literally blowing in the opposite direction. And they said the waves are going crazy. So it's one of those storms are brewing. But let me just ask you a question. Have you ever been here? Have you just ever been exhausted, like in all areas of your life? You're just done. How is your decision-making process when you're in that point? I know for me, it's not usually the best. So we have exhausted disciples. As my dad would say, it's so far past late, you're actually early now. So they just wanted to get to their destination. Then off in the distance, they see someone or something coming at them on the water, and they freak out. And the reason they freak out is because they literally thought, they believed that it was a ghost. So this is a boat full of 12 grown men, and the passage literally says they shrieked out in fear. So they're like a bunch of kids screaming their heads off. They're freaking out because they think a ghost is coming. I don't know, maybe to kill them, to possess them, I'm not really sure. But then again, let's think of the setting. So it's between 3 and 6 a.m., so the sun is not up. So it's dark, it's really windy. It's probably so windy it's audible. So it's kind of that spooky wind noise going on, and the waves are crashing. So it's kind of a pretty freaky setting already. And then they kind of see something coming at them in the dark. I'm going to be honest, I'd probably be freaking out myself too. But then, this something, it turned out it was Jesus. And again, immediately Jesus spoke to them. And he says, take courage, I am. Stop being afraid. Take courage, I am. Stop being afraid. So all right, back at the beginning, Jesus sent the disciples off, right? So this is Jesus, God incarnate, Jesus creator of the world, Jesus I am. And he told them to go, and he cast them out on the water. So this is the one who is worthy of their trust. But again, doesn't this happen to us? Aren't we at times confident of a call or decision, but often along the way we forget. We forget that call or the decision that we made. And everything starts getting a little freaky, and we start freaking out. We start trying to, why do we get here? What's going on? Did God even, is this where God wants me? Like, what? But this is when Jesus speaks to the disciples the name that God gives Moses back in Exodus 3:14. So Moses is speaking to a burning bush, and it was God. God was presenting himself to Moses, and Moses says to God, he says, well, who should I tell the Israelites has sent me? And God says, tell them I am that I am. And literally what that means is I am the beginning and the end. I am the first and the last. I am the one who has always been and will always be. I am everything that has ever existed has come out of me. I am. So there's power in that name. So to them, when they heard Jesus say, take courage, I am. Stop being afraid. They instantly knew. I mean, it was like it hit them hard who it was. So this very statement should move them to peace. So then Peter says, all right, if it is you, Lord, command me to come to you on the water. So Peter's acknowledging if it really is the great I am, then it is completely possible for him to come up. But if it's not, then it really is a ghost. So Peter's kind of testing Jesus here. But he's also expressing faith that if this really is Jesus, this can happen. So Jesus, again, he says, come. This is almost going back to when Jesus feeds the 5,000, and they're like, oh, we've got 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he's like, that'll work. Same thing here, kind of the same sentiment of Peter saying, if it really is you, call me to come, and I will. So Jesus says, come. So Peter gets out of the boat, and his eyes are like laser focused on Jesus. And he's completely trusting that this is going to work, and he literally begins to walk on water. All right. So put yourself in Peter's shoes. What are you thinking at this point? I think I'd be like, I'm walking on water. This is sweet. I'm walking on water. This is sweet. I'm walking on water. And I'd instantly become aware of my surroundings, and that's exactly what happened to Peter. All of a sudden, the reality of Peter's setting came flooding back to him. The passage says that he both perceived and felt the strong wind, and that he was frightened. And then Peter's eyes fell off the great I am, that is the one that created the wind and created the waves, and he began to focus on that which the Creator created, and he became fearful. So again, it's really the exact same situation from earlier. Jesus, the great I am, told the disciples to go across the water to the other side, Their eyes fell from him, and they ended in fear and frustration. In this situation, when Peter's eyes fell from Jesus, he sank. In both instances, their feeling and circumstances dictated what is true, and their faith failed them. Jesus never changed. Jesus was never out of control of the situation. He never didn't know what was happening or what was going to happen. The truth of Jesus remained. But the disciples let their feelings and circumstances mislead them. But again, let's be honest with ourselves. Would we respond any differently? It's really easy to read the Gospels or to read any part of the Bible and to point fingers and say, what cowards, what fools, what were they thinking? I mean, Jesus was present with them. Why would they do these things? But the reality is, if you really are honest with yourself, you do the exact same thing. I do it as well. So we aren't really that unlike the disciples. We really are fickle too. Okay, so back to my story that I started at the very beginning. So a little bit about my wife and I. We were married in the fall of 2005. And I was making the big bucks at Starbucks. Right. Do we have any baristas in here? Former baristas? All right, there we go. So our desire was to go into ministry, and we really felt like most likely that would be on staff with crew. But we had this small little problem that was somewhere between $90,000 and $95,000 in school debt that kind of was a problem for that. And I'm not sure if you know this or not, but us staff people aren't exactly high rollers. But along the way, God blessed us, and I landed a job that moved us to Phoenix. We were living in Cincinnati area at the time. And we were in Phoenix for about 11 months before I got a promotion that moved us to Sacramento. And this promotion actually provided for us a great potential for us to get our debt paid off in just a few years. So to me, paralleling the story, this was like when Jesus sent the disciples out into the boat. It was like we didn't really want to leave. We really didn't want to leave, but we knew this is what Jesus was directing us to. So we got into the boat and we went away. Some of the backstory, though, is by the time we actually landed in Sacramento, it was 14 months after we got married, and we were looking for the 5th place for us to live, 5th house. So we were completely sick of rentals. We both loved working on homes, tearing down walls, ripping out kitchens, doing home remodels. And our friends in Sacramento own homes, and they cost somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000. And in California, it's a starter house. And we both were like, that's crazy. We can't do that. So we knew that, since we knew that was kind of crazy, we had this great idea that we would buy a fixer-upper for significantly cheaper. So I have a couple pictures up here. So there's me breaking a wall down. That was fun. There's my wife. She's pregnant with William. She did that the whole time. I was gone one weekend, and she was 8 months pregnant. And she had totally repainted a room, moved a bed, a queen-size bed in there all by herself, a desk, hung shelves. I was like, you were in the preterm labor once. Why did you do this while I was gone? But it looked really, really cool. We'll see a picture of it. Go to the next slide. So there's our kitchen. So we actually moved the kitchen. So that was a bedroom, and it turned into the kitchen. So that was kind of crazy. If you go to the next slide. And that was the old kitchen. And we turned the old kitchen into that bedroom. That's what my wife did while I was gone. None of that was in there, and she put it all in there. So that was our little home project. Okay, now remember that there's this little thing called the housing bubble that kind of burst and blew up our economy. Well, we bought right before that popped. So before we actually purchased, our parents shared some strong reservations with us. Our realtor shared strong reservations with us, and our mortgage broker. So the people that make money off us buying a house, they all were like, I don't think you should do this. I don't think you should do this. But we had dreamed up this grand idea to get our debt paid off quickly. We thought we could flip this house, get out of Sacramento and on staff within 12 to 18 months. We knew very clearly that God had provided a great job that would allow us to pay off our debt quickly, but we just wanted to go faster than that. So our circumstances, desires, and emotions kicked in. We knew what we wanted, and that's what we went for. So let me ask you guys a question. Have you ever let circumstances trump what you know God has for you? I'm sure everybody in here has done that. Let me play a scenario out, though. Maybe there are some of you sitting in here that are doing this in a dating relationship. You know the characteristics of a person God would have for you. And perhaps, though, you start to get a little antsy. And you start wondering, when exactly am I going to meet this person that God has for me? And maybe, does that person really exist? I mean, does God really care about that? Doesn't he just want me to be happy? And so instead of dating a godly man or a godly woman, you find a good guy or a good gal. And then sure, there's maybe a couple components missing, but you see a lot of potential, I mean, surely they're going to end up being the person that God has for you. But however, deep down inside, there's a part of you that says this isn't right. So aren't we just like the disciples? Don't we just try to take things into our own hands? There's a million different scenarios like that you can paint. So back to our story, Peter cries out to Jesus, "Jesus, save me." Literally, Peter says, "Save me from this death." He's quite sure that if Jesus doesn't step in, he's going to die. And frankly, he's going to. That's actually a true statement, given the state of the ocean. We go put on the next slide. It's wonderfully a little cheesy, but gives you the idea. It's really hard. Everything's like classic artwork, which if you're an art major, it's okay. It's great. That'd be Cody. So here's again, Jesus, there's one of those immediates again. Jesus does step in immediately, and he grabs Peter by the arm and saves him. But then Jesus says to Peter, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" So the story ends with Peter being saved, a reminder that we cannot mess up so much that Jesus will eventually let us go, or that his power is too small to rescue us. But Jesus does still rebuke Peter for his lack of faith. The amazing thing is that in all of this is to remember that Jesus will rescue us, and we might be drenched from the water, probably a little cold, and maybe even feel a little embarrassed. And the reality is there's probably going to be some hard truth that comes our way, but he will rescue. We would certainly have been better off to focus on him the whole time. And I certainly don't want to minimize that, because sometimes when we go off course, there are some serious consequences to those things. And prayerfully, none of us will experience those things. But he will save. He will save. So back to our house story. Well, like I said, the bubble burst. It actually burst 4 months after we bought our house. We had invested $35,000 of our own cash in this house, and it was gone in 4 months. Gone. Actually, one night, out of frustration, I just shouted, maybe yelled, I might as well have just thrown this cash in a pile and lit it on fire. Because it would have saved us 10 months of frustration, 10 months of long nights, bloody knuckles, delayed projects, and isolation from people. But the beautiful thing, I'm standing here. God in his great grace saved us as he did Peter. We needed $35,000 in order to make our transition onto staff. And my final bonus from work was about $30,000. And we have about another $5,000 in savings that we weren't really planning for. So in his way, he rescued us. But I really believe God's his little rebuke to us, his little, you have little faith. Why did you doubt? Was the reality that $35,000 actually probably, we could have had that, and we could have moved to Oxford and had money to put a down payment on our house. But instead, we're stuck in a rental cycle again, the very thing that we absolutely despise. But, our lack of faith, our lack of following what we knew he had for us was not strong enough to deter God's plan. Like I said, we're standing here, but we certainly paid a cost. And like Peter, we were saved, and also like Peter, we're a little wet and a little cold and frankly a little embarrassed about the whole situation. So again, I want to ask you a question. Where is it that you're trusting in life's circumstances or your feelings instead of Jesus, the great I am? So direct application, we just saw a video for Panama City Beach. And we've also been talking a lot about summer project here. And, I fully recognize, and I totally believe, and all the staff do, that God isn't calling everyone to go to these things. But I also believe that there's probably some of you in here that God is banging on your heart and saying, please trust me. Trust me, go. Go to these things. Go to one of these things. Go to both. I don't know. And just, please, listen to him. But I'm going to close with this illustration. It's one of my favorites. All right. So it's winter. It is winter, even though it doesn't feel like it. Let's say it's winter and you live in the Arctic, or, I don't know, maybe Minnesota. Any from Minnesota here? All right, safe, good. Before you is a glorious lake frozen over. And it's been 20 below zero, and there isn't a doubt in your mind that the ice on the lake is going to hold you. So you go running off the dock and you jump. Except small problem, you were dead wrong. Through the icy crack. You had a ton of faith, but the object of your faith, it turns out, was an 8-inch thin sheet of ice covering the pond. So a week goes by, your pneumonia's cleared up, and once again, you're looking out on a frozen lake. But it's warm, and your socks are still a little wet from your last miscalculation. So with great fear, timidity, and very little faith, you inch your way out onto the ice. It holds you. It turns out that the ice is 2 feet thick. This time you had only a tiny bit of faith, but the object of your faith was trustworthy. It was 2 feet thick. The issue is really not the amount of faith, it's the object of our faith, which is Jesus. And whether we are willing to take whatever amount of faith we have and place it in him. Even filled with doubt, you can still step out on the ice. So you might not feel that Jesus is trustworthy, but your feelings really mean nothing in regards to who Jesus is. Jesus is trustworthy. Jesus is the great I am. So is there a step he's leading you to take? Or maybe you've taken that initial step and like Peter, your eyes have fallen from Jesus. So let me just encourage you to get back on the ice. Turn your eyes to Jesus. I promise you, he will not crack.